We've made it. We're here. Welcome to Checkered Tuning. If you aren't familiar with Checkered, they're a small, family-run operation with extensive experience in EFI tuning and have a very positive reputation. They're a perfect answer to the question, where do I take my car to get tuned? And today is the day where my car grows some balls and puts its new engine to work and makes good, safe power. But first, we need to hook the car up to the hub dyno.
So Trent, we've just bolted this bad boy up to the dyno. We're about to start doing the tuning process. Tell me a bit about that and sort of how we get to the end result.
So obviously first we've done all our safety checks, oils and waters and temperatures and stuff like that. We'll get it on, set our fuel pressure and everything in here, set our injector size. Hopefully it's nice and close so we can work from there. And then once we've got those set, obviously you've got a wideband in here, I've got one in it as well, so we can compare the two. Do the basic stuff first, get the cruise mixture set, so that's nice and easy, and that gives us a baseline to know where it's going to sit in the map. Then we can start adding a little bit of load to it, and start getting the fuel map built incrementally up in RPM, so that we know it's safe for when we want to start winding some boost into it.
Yep.
The timing map, because we've done quite a few, we can sort of write that based on your mods and what is typical, and then we'll bring it back like 5 or 6 degrees so that we know that we're well and truly in a safe position.
Yep.
We'll start dialing in the fuel all the way up until peak RPM, which in this case was somewhere between 7 and 7.5.
Yep.
Then we can start winding some boost in as well. We'll bring the boost up in. This one we're a little bit worried about exceeding the limits of the gearbox.
Yeah, look, it's a track car, but number one for me is that it works and it's reliable. So
yeah, it's more fun to do lots of track days than it is to do lots of work in the pits.
Yeah, and the gearboxes aren't cheap, and aftermarket options aren't cheap. So keeping it, there's a bit of conjecture, and it depends on who you talk to, but I've sort of set the target as low to mid 300 Newton meter range.
Yep.
In terms of torque, and that's, I think, easily achievable with this engine.
Yeah. I think this car will pretty much make quite a bit more than that if you wanted to.
If we wanted to, yeah. It's just a matter of turning the dialing boost up. And I guess that's exactly the right. Next question I might have is, did you want to sort of mention how we do boost control and how it works in simplistic form? Yeah,
so on this one's fairly easy to set up, being internal gate. So we just use in this case it's using a Mega Squirt obviously. We use a target boost, and then we use a duty cycle to pulse the solenoid to give us required boost control. There are two ways to hook that up. You can either do differential pressure or just the normal simple interrupt setup. On this particular car, the interrupt setup seems to have worked.
Yeah.
In the past.
We did, and I mean, with the, shall we say, prior engine, boost control was working and it was all working quite well, and I think we're just sort of thankfully able to continue, obviously retune it, but continue to use the same boost controller and the same setup, which is handy.
Fine. Yeah. And the Mega Squirt does do a good job of doing it. You've got fairly good control in there of whatever you need to do. So.
Excellent. Well, I think it's time we start
making some noise.
Making power.
Awesome. Let's do it.
So after some discussion between Trent and myself on where the engine has come from and what the plan is for the car, he gets to work on bringing the car up to temp, checking that all the basics look right, and starts to work on the tune. Initially, it's low RPM and lower load testing, and there's some engine run-in things going on here. It's all going really quite nicely. All the while, I keep an eye out for anything unusual under the bonnet and check for any leaks or potential issues. I'd rather not interrupt a mad genius at work, so I think it's best if I leave Trent to do his thing. Now this is the moment where Trent and I talk about the little issue we're having. In short, we've got boost creep. Easiest way to explain this is with the manifold pressure output from the dyno log. With the boost target set at 8 psi, the internal wastegate is able to maintain that only until around 5,000 RPM, at which point the boost very quickly jumps up, as you can see with this big peak between 5,500 and 6,000 RPM. What we want is something more linear all the way to 7,000 RPM. As is, we just don't have enough control of the boost level. There are many causes for such an issue: fuel type, timing settings, turbo manifold and exhaust configurations. They all affect the efficiency of the entire setup. So we pulled the car off the dyno. I quickly took the car home, removed the turbo and manifold from the car as a whole assembly, and then took the turbine housing off the turbo. That was all because it needed some die grinding or porting. The turbine housing was ported to encourage flow from the engine exhaust manifold towards the wastegate port, and the port itself was enlarged. With both of these done, it was all bolted back together, and the car bolted back up to Trent's hub dyno. And we're now back from the dyno. Although it went great, it didn't go perfect. So let me start you off with the first issue we had. We were running the car up, just getting it up to temp, just making sure there were no issues, no leaks and that sort of thing. Slowly we started to work on building up the boost, bringing on the power. Early on at around say 4,000 RPM we started to see boost creep pretty significantly, to the point where we completely disconnected the wastegate. And even with that fully open, or disconnected the wastegate actuator, even with that fully open, the car would still build way too much boost at around the 4,000 to 5,000 RPM mark, to the point where it was coming along and then just jumping up at around that 5,000 RPM mark to sort of 18 or more PSI, and that was beyond what we could control at this point. So clearly the wastegate wasn't doing enough to keep the boost levels down so that we could control them the way we wanted to. So at that point we realized we needed to pull the car off and fix up that problem. So that involved completely porting the wastegate port on the turbocharger, and also the inlet from the manifold into the turbo, and directing airflow towards that port to encourage exhaust flow out the wastegate.
While I was there, I cleaned up a few other bits as well. So the flange between the turbo housing on the turbo inside and the exhaust manifold, or the turbo manifold on the engine, ported those and matched them a little bit, and also ported and cleaned up the cast dump from Kraken. Cleaned that up as well, particularly on the wastegate side and the wastegate flapper side, to encourage a bit more opening, so we can actually open the wastegate port more, and also to encourage flow, because there was a few flat edges and walls and things that would discourage flow, and so it was all around just trying to make the exhaust flow more efficient. After doing that, we also enlarged the port of the turbocharger, so that makes a significant difference to the amount of flow that we can get through that hole. Doing all that, put it all back together, I was starting to get pretty good at dismantling and reassembling the turbo and pulling it off on the car. Got the car back onto the dyno, and that's where things started to go really good. We started to make nice solid power. We could see that we could control the turbo and the boost levels really nicely. So the EBC, or the electronic boost control, and Mac valve was working great. The wastegate and so that was an aftermarket wastegate actuator, that was all working fine now, and we could maintain sort of 8 psi, which is sort of the baseline point we wanted to start. Just 8 psi all the way across. We could get that consistent right up through to sort of the top end of the rev range, which is great. So that meant that we're not getting the boost creep that we were getting before. Then we could start to dial up the boost and dial up the power. The aim at this point was just to sort of hit around the 300 horsepower mark at the top end. That was where we were thinking was safe to maintain a driveline that doesn't blow itself to pieces, particularly the gearbox. That's sort of the next weakest link. So we thought, well, we'll start with 300, we'll try and aim for that, and we'll try and bring the car up to that point. So we slowly built the boost up. We got to about 15, 16 psi, somewhere around there. We're getting up to the 300 mark. It's starting to look nice and consistent. We've got some good lines. We've got some nice linear power. And then we started to get a big lean out at around the 6,000 to 7,000 RPM mark, when we're starting to get higher up in the rev range and higher up in the power levels. After a few runs and a few checks, we made sure we had fuel in the tank and all that sort of thing. We realized that we'd run out of fuel pump. Effectively, the pump just couldn't push enough fuel all the way through the fuel lines up to the injectors at that high RPM, sort of 6,000 to 7,000 RPM range, when we're hitting around the 300 and a little bit more, 300 and something horsepower. And with obviously E85, you need more fuel, therefore we need more fuel pump. So effectively we've hit the limits of that pump. I expected a bit more from the DW200, but I suspect OEM wiring, OEM relay, OEM lines, everything's pretty much stock except for the pump and the injectors. So I guess when you've got those limitations from the wiring side, say that OEM wiring isn't really feeding as much current as perhaps it could, so we just ran out of pump. And that's, I guess, the next thing I need to work out is how do we address that issue so that we can rev beyond 6,000 RPM. At the moment, the car's running fantastic, and you could hoon it around all day as long as you kept it under 6,000 RPM. You wouldn't hit the limits of that fuel pump, and we'd be safely making pretty much 300 horsepower up until about 6,000 RPM. So really good. However, that does mean it's not quite there. So close, but not quite there. So I need to go away and do some thinking about how we address this so that we can future-proof the car, make sure everything's sturdy, and then potentially wind the boost up even a little bit more in the future. But for now we're 90% there in terms of tune. It's going really well. Cold starts and things are all still pretty good. Alex got them right beforehand, and then when we were at the checkered tuning the thing, he had to give it a few tweaks. We did obviously change injectors, which made that a little bit out of whack. But good progress. And the important thing, I suppose, is the engine is solid and it's running really well. I've already dropped some of the oil out and refilled it because it was sort of that running period. I've replaced it with the same stuff. So again, it's the mineral running in oil from Penrite, same sort of thing I was running before. It's a 10 or a 1540, so it's a bit thick on the cold side, but that's fine. Just, you know, we'll run it in and get the car running up. Give it a few runs on the dyno, and then maybe a track day or two, and then we can change the oil again. But yeah, it's going well. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope that's it's been insightful in this bit of a journey. We're nearly there, and one more day on the dyno, or a few more hours on the dyno, and she's going to be ready for a hoon. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Ta.